The blood-red sunset cast long shadows across Delilah Rosemont's parched fields as she drove her rusted shovel into the cracked earth one more time, desperation fueling each thrust. Sweat trickled down her neck despite the cooling evening air in the summer of 1878, her fourth year on this stubborn plot of land outside Skidoo, California. 4 years of hope slowly withering like the crops she'd failed to raise. 4 years of whispers growing louder with each cloudless day. "Cursed," she muttered, repeating what the townsfolk of Skidoo had been saying behind her back and increasingly to her face. "As if I could stop the rain." Delilah leaned on her shovel, surveying the brittle remains of what should have been a thriving vegetable garden. The entire San Joaquin Valley had suffered through drought before, but never this severe, and never this localized. Somehow, the neighboring ranches managed to coax enough growth to survive, while her 20 acres remained obstinately barren. 3 years ago, when the drought first settled over the region, folks had been sympathetic to the young widow trying to make it on her own. By the second year, they'd grown suspicious. Now, in the fourth year, with Skidoo's own wells running dangerously low, sympathy had hardened into accusation. Witch, some called her. Others used words less kind. The theories varied. She'd angered God, she practiced dark arts, she'd built her homestead atop sacred ground, but the conclusion remained the same. Delilah Rosemont had brought the drought upon them all. She drove the shovel into the ground one final time, defeated, when the sound of approaching hoofbeats made her straighten. Visitors were rare these days and rarely friendly when they came. A lone rider appeared on the horizon, silhouetted against the dying sun. Delilah wiped her brow with her sleeve and stood her ground, one hand tight around the shovel handle. As the rider approached, she could make out a tall figure, broad-shouldered and lean, sitting easy in the saddle of a magnificent chestnut stallion. The stranger pulled his horse to a stop 10 feet from where she stood. Dust settled around them as he removed his hat, revealing thick sandy hair and a face weathered by sun and wind, yet still youthful. He couldn't have been more than 30. "Evening, madam," he called, his voice carrying a hint of the East beneath its western drawl. "Name's Owen Xavier. I'm looking for work." Delilah almost laughed. "You've come to the wrong place, Mr. Xavier. Nothing grows here." "So I've heard," he said, eyes scanning her barren fields with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. Not the usual judgment she saw from others, but something more assessing. "They're saying in town that you've had a string of bad luck. Is that what they're calling it?" Delilah gripped her shovel tighter. "Did they also mention I'm supposedly a witch who's stolen all the water from the county?" To her surprise, a smile cracked his sun-worn face. "They mentioned something along those lines. Seemed like nonsense to me." "Then you're the only one who thinks so." Delilah sighed, suddenly aware of how tired she was. "I haven't any work or money to offer you, Mr. Xavier. Best move on to the Thompson place. They're always looking for hands." Owen Xavier swung down from his horse with the fluid grace of a man who'd spent his life in the saddle. Up close, she noted eyes the color of a summer sky and a jawline that could have been carved from the Sierra Nevada granite. "I've already been to the Thompson place," he said, "and the Peterson farm and the Carson ranch. None of them are hiring." He glanced around again. "But I'm not looking for regular ranch work, madam. I'm a diviner." Delilah stared at him. "A what?" "Water diviner. Some call it dowsing." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a Y-shaped branch. "I find water where others can't." For the first time in months, a spark of hope flickered in Delilah's chest, quickly doused by suspicion. "And you just happened to show up at the driest homestead in California," Owen shrugged. "I go where I'm needed most, and from what I heard in town, you need water more than anyone." "I have no money to pay you," she repeated. Then I'll work for food and lodging, he replied easily. And a percentage of whatever crops you manage to grow once we find water. Delilah hesitated. The sensible thing would be to send this stranger on his way. Men who appeared out of nowhere offering salvation usually brought nothing but trouble. But sensible choices hadn't gotten her far these past years, and desperation had a way of rewriting rules. 1 week, she finally said. You can sleep in the barn. Owen nodded, as if he'd never doubted her answer. 1 week, he agreed, extending his hand. Delilah looked at it for a long moment before clasping it with her own. His palm was calloused but warm against her work-roughened skin. Neither could have known that in that simple handshake, their futures had just irreversibly intertwined. Dawn broke over the eastern hills as Delilah stirred a pot of thin oatmeal over the cook stove. She'd been up since before first light, the ingrained habit of a farmer who couldn't afford to waste daylight. Through the small kitchen window, she could see Owen Xavier already at work, walking her property with slow, deliberate steps, the forked branch held before him. She'd been skeptical when he explained his process the night before, how the dowsing rod would dip toward the ground when it sensed water beneath. It seemed like frontier superstition, the kind of folk practice her late husband James would have scoffed at. James had been a man of science and planning, believing that success came through careful calculation rather than listening to sticks. Yet James's calculations had failed them in the end. The land they'd purchased with their life savings had proven stubborn beyond all prediction. And then the influenza had taken him, leaving Delilah alone with 20 acres of dreams turning to dust. A sharp knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. Owen stood in the doorway, hat in hand, looking expectant. "Breakfast will be ready shortly," she said, gesturing to the table. "Actually, I hoped you might join me outside first. I want to show you something." Curiosity piqued, Delilah followed him across the yard to the northwest corner of her property, where a small cluster of cottonwood trees stood, the only truly green things on her land. "You see these trees?" Owen asked, running his hand along the rough bark of the largest one. "They're thriving while everything else is dying. They've always been the healthiest things on the property," Delilah acknowledged. "James thought it was because their roots went deeper than anything else we planted." Owen nodded, a smile playing at his lips. "Your husband was partly right. Their roots go deep, but they're going after something." He held up his dowsing rod. "There's water here, Mrs. Rosemont, not just a trickle but a significant source." Hope and disbelief warred within her. If that's true, why couldn't we find it before? James dug 3 wells on this property. "All on the eastern side," Owen observed. "Am I right?" Delilah nodded slowly. "That's where most folks would dig, where the land dips, but sometimes water doesn't follow the obvious path." He tapped the ground with his boot. "I think there's an underground spring that feeds these trees, but it's deeper than a standard well." "How deep?" "Can't say for certain without digging, but I'd wager at least 60 feet down, maybe more." Delilah's heart sank. "I can't afford to dig a well that deep. Even if I could find someone willing to work for me, the equipment alone would cost more than I have." Owen regarded her thoughtfully. "What if I told you there's another way? A slower method, but one that would cost next to nothing beyond sweat and time?" "I'm listening." "Instead of digging straight down, we tunnel in from the side of that rise." He pointed to a gentle slope about 50 yards away. "It'll take longer, but we can shore it up as we go, and we won't need expensive drilling equipment." Delilah questioned, raising an eyebrow. "I did say I was looking for work," Owen reminded her with a slight smile. "And I've dug my share of horizontal wells before." Delilah studied the land, then the man before her. There was something about Owen Xavier that didn't quite fit the image of the itinerant worker he claimed to be. His hands bore calluses, true enough, but his speech was educated, his manner confident in a way that spoke of more than just frontier survival. "Why would you go to all this trouble for a stranger?" she asked bluntly. "Especially one the whole town thinks is cursed." Owen's expression grew serious. "Mrs. Rosemont, I've seen what happens to people, to women especially, when fear takes hold of a community. My own mother was driven from her home in Pennsylvania because folks decided she was to blame for a series of crop failures." His jaw tightened at the memory. "She wasn't a witch. She was just different and alone, which made her an easy target." The quiet passion in his voice resonated with something deep inside Delilah. "And what happened to her?" she asked softly. "She died on the road west," he answered, his eyes meeting hers. "I was 15. I promised myself I'd never stand by and watch someone else suffer the same fate." The moment stretched between them, a connection formed of shared understanding. Delilah nodded slowly. "All right, Mr. Xavier, we'll try your horizontal well, but I still have nothing to pay you with." "I told you my terms," he replied. "Food, lodging, and a percentage of future harvests. Plus," he added with a sudden grin that transformed his serious face, "the satisfaction of proving all those fine citizens of Skidoo wrong." Despite herself, Delilah found an answering smile tugging at her lips. That last part might be worth the effort all by itself. That evening, after a day of surveying and planning, they sat at Delilah's kitchen table poring over rough sketches Owen had made of his proposed horizontal well. "We'll need timber for supports," he explained, pointing to his drawings. "The good news is we can harvest what we need from that stand of pines on the eastern edge of your property." "Those were supposed to be our windbreak," Delilah mused. "James planted them our first year here." Owen glanced up at her. "Tell me about him, your husband." Delilah's hands stilled around her cup of chicory coffee. Few people asked about James anymore. It was as if his memory had been erased along with her standing in the community. "He was a teacher back east," she began. "Taught natural philosophy, what they call science now. He had all these theories about agriculture, things he'd read in journals and books." A fond smile touched her lips. "He could talk for hours about soil composition and crop rotation, things most farmers learn by doing rather than reading." "What brought you out here?" "The same thing that brings most people west. A fresh start. Land of our own." Delilah sighed. "James had a lung condition that the doctors said would improve in a drier climate. The irony isn't lost on me that we found the driest spot in California." "Did his health improve?" "For a while. Those first 2 years were good. We were happy making plans." Her voice trailed off. "Then the drought started and the influenza came through. His lungs couldn't fight it off." Owen was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry. It sounds like he was a good man." "He was. Stubborn like most men, but good." Delilah studied Owen across the table. "What about you? You mentioned your mother, but what brought you to California?" "Water," he said simply. "Or the finding of it. After my mother died, I was taken in by an old German fellow who practiced dowsing. He taught me the trade, along with practical geology and a bit of engineering." Owen twirled the pencil between his fingers. "I've been moving west ever since, following the droughts, helping where I can." "That's an unusual calling." "Says the woman trying to farm in desert conditions," he countered with a hint of a smile. Delilah laughed, the sound surprising her. How long had it been since she'd laughed? "Fair point, Mr. Xavier." "Owen," he corrected gently. "If we're going to be digging through earth together, we might as well use our Christian names." She hesitated only briefly. "Delilah, then." "Delilah," he repeated, and something about the way her name sounded in his voice made her look away. suddenly conscious of her work-worn appearance and the simple surroundings. "We should start early tomorrow," she said, standing to clear the dishes. "There's a lot of work ahead." Owen nodded, rising as well. "I'll head out to the barn. Thank you for the meal." As he left, Delilah found herself watching his retreating figure longer than was proper. There was something about Owen Xavier that unsettled her, not in the way the townspeople's suspicion did, but in a manner she hadn't experienced since James had first walked into her father's general store back in Ohio and asked about books on California agriculture. She shook her head at her own foolishness. Owen was here to find water, nothing more. And water was all that mattered now, water to save her land, water to redeem her name, water to silence the whispers that followed her through town. Still, as she readied herself for bed, Delilah couldn't help but think that for the first time in years, something besides despair had taken root in the parched soil of her heart. The next morning brought a complication Delilah hadn't anticipated. As she and Owen were gathering tools to begin marking the site for their horizontal well, a cloud of dust on the road announced visitors. 3 riders approached, their postures stiff with purpose, even at a distance. "That's Sheriff Walton in the middle," Delilah said, recognizing the distinctive bulk of Skidoo's law enforcement. "The others look like members of the town council." Owen straightened, setting down the axe he'd been sharpening. "Any idea what brings them out?" "Nothing good," she replied grimly. "They haven't bothered to come all the way out here since they delivered the petition last month." "Petition?" "Asking me to sell my land and leave the county. They believe my curse is affecting the town's water supply." Delilah's jaw tightened. "As if I have that kind of power." The riders pulled up in front of the house, and Sheriff Walton removed his hat in a gesture of courtesy that didn't reach his eyes. "Mrs. Rosemont," he began without preamble, "I see you've taken on help. Unusual given the state of your property." "Good morning to you too, Sheriff," Delilah replied evenly. "Yes, Mr. Xavier is working for me. I wasn't aware I needed the town's permission to hire assistants." The man to Walton's left, Harold Greenberg, the owner of Skidoo's Mercantile, spoke up. "We're concerned about the purpose of this arrangement. Word is that Mr. Xavier here claims to be able to find water." "That's correct," Owen said, stepping forward with an easy confidence that seemed to irritate the visitors. "I'm a water diviner by trade." The third man, whom Delilah recognized as Reverend Simmons, scoffed openly. "Dowsing is superstition, nothing more." "Maybe so, Reverend," Owen replied with a slight smile, "but it's superstition that's found water for ranches and homesteads across 7 territories." Sheriff Walton dismounted, his bulk making the movement less graceful than he might have wished. "Mrs. Rosemont, the town council has sent us with a proposition. The drought has reached critical levels in Skidoo. Our municipal well is down to less than 10 feet of water." "I'm sorry to hear that," Delilah said, though her tone suggested she understood where this was heading. "The council is prepared to offer you fair market value for your land," Walton continued. "The geological survey conducted last year suggests there might be an aquifer running beneath this property. With proper drilling equipment, we could access it for the town's benefit." Delilah felt her temper rising. "That's convenient timing, Sheriff. For 4 years I've been told this land is worthless, cursed, and suddenly the town decides it might have water after all." "The survey was inconclusive at the time," Greenberg interjected smoothly. "But desperate times call for fresh assessments." "And what happens to me if I sell?" Delilah asked, though she already knew the answer. Reverend Simmons cleared his throat. "The council feels it would be best if you relocated, perhaps to Sacramento or San Francisco. Cities offer many opportunities for a woman of your situation." "My situation?" Delilah's voice was dangerously quiet. "Widowed, childless, struggling to maintain a property," Simmons clarified, though his eyes suggested he meant something else entirely. Owen stepped closer to Delilah, not touching her but clearly aligning himself with her position. "Seems to me Mrs. Rosemont has the right to work her own land as she sees fit." Sheriff Walton turned his attention to Owen, eyes narrowing. "And you are?" "Owen Xavier, as the lady said." "Just passing through looking for work." "Well, Mr. Xavier, perhaps you'd be better served passing through a bit faster. There's nothing for you here." "On the contrary," Owen replied easily, "I've already found promising signs of water on Mrs. Rosemont's property. We're beginning work today." The three men exchanged glances, and Delilah didn't miss the flash of alarm that passed between them. "Water?" Greenberg asked, a new edge to his voice. "Where exactly?" "That would be Mrs. Rosemont's business," Owen answered. "As it's Mrs. Rosemont's land." Sheriff Walton's face darkened. "The town's survival is everyone's business, Xavier. If there's water here while Skidoo runs dry, people will want answers. Perhaps they should ask why a geological survey that suggested water on my property was kept quiet until the town decided it wanted my land," Delilah suggested, her voice steadier than she felt. The silence that followed confirmed her suspicion. "Our offer stands, Mrs. Rosemont," Walton finally said. $500 for the full 20 acres. It's more than fair given the condition of the place." "And if I refuse?" Walton replaced his hat, his meaning clear as he mounted his horse. "Then I hope your water diviner is as good as he claims. Because folks around here are getting mighty thirsty and mighty impatient." As the three men rode away, Delilah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. "They knew," she said quietly. "All this time they suspected there was water here." Owen nodded. "And they were happy to let you struggle until they could force you to sell cheap." "But why? What's so special about my land compared to any other property around Skidoo?" "I don't know," Owen admitted, "but I intend to find out. In the meantime, we've got work to do. If they're making offers, we need to find that water quickly." Delilah stared at the retreating figures, a new determination hardening within her. "Yes, let's get started." The work began in earnest that day. Owen marked out the spot where they would begin tunneling into the hillside, carefully calculating the angle that would take them toward the underground spring he believed fed the cottonwood trees. For 3 days they labored, felling pine trees and cutting them into support beams. Owen taught Delilah how to notch the wood for proper bracing, and together they created a sturdy entrance to what would become their horizontal well. On the 4th day, they began digging. The soil was hard, packed, and unforgiving, forcing them to chip away with picks before shoveling out the loosened earth. Every 3 feet, they installed wooden supports to prevent collapse. It was exhausting work, made more difficult by the limited space within the tunnel. By the end of the first week, they had progressed nearly 20 feet into the hillside, with no sign of water. Delilah tried to hide her disappointment as they sat together on her porch that evening, muscles aching from the day's labor. "It will take time," Owen assured her, sipping the coffee she'd brewed. "We've only just begun." "Time is something I may not have much of," Delilah replied, nodding toward the road where another dust cloud was approaching. "Looks like we have more visitors." This time it wasn't the sheriff, but a group of townspeople, farmers and ranchers whose lands bordered her own. The party of 7 rode up to the house, their expressions a mix of suspicion and barely concealed hostility. A man Delilah recognized as Frank Peterson, whose cattle ranch lay to the north of her property, spoke first. "Evening, Mrs. Rosemont. Word in town is that you're digging for water." "That's my right on my own land," she replied, standing to face them despite her exhaustion. Not if you're diverting water that should be flowing to neighboring properties, said another man, Bill Thompson, whose farm had once been friendly toward her when James was alive. That's not how underground springs work, Owen interjected, rising to stand beside Delilah. We're not stealing anyone's water, says the outsider who conveniently showed up right when the town made an offer on this land, Peterson retorted. Mighty suspicious timing. Delilah felt her patience snap. 4 years I've struggled here while you all whispered about curses and witchcraft. Now, suddenly everyone's concerned about the water under my property. Where was this concern when my husband died and I was left to manage alone? Her words hung in the air, a challenge no one seemed eager to answer directly. Times are desperate, Delilah, Thompson finally said, his use of her first name a reminder of their former friendly relations. The whole valley is drying up. Children in town are getting sick from the poor quality of what little water remains in the municipal well. So the council sent you to convince me to sell? Delilah asked. Peterson shook his head. The council doesn't know we're here. We came on our own to warn you. Warn me. People are scared, Thompson explained. When folks get scared enough, they do things they wouldn't normally do. There's talk in town. Ugly talk. Are you threatening Mrs. Rosemont? Owen asked quietly, but there was steel beneath his calm tone. No, Peterson insisted. We're trying to prevent something worse. If you find water while the town goes dry, there are those who won't wait for legal proceedings. A chill ran through Delilah as she understood the implication. You think they would take it by force? I think desperate people do desperate things, Thompson said grimly. Especially when they've already convinced themselves you're something other than a widow trying to survive. Delilah looked at the faces of the men before her neighbors who had gradually turned from friends to strangers over the years of drought. She saw fear there and something else, a flicker of shame. What would you have me do? She asked. Abandon my home. The land my husband and I poured everything into. The men exchanged uncomfortable glances, no one willing to voice the obvious answer. Owen stepped forward. Gentlemen, I understand your concerns, but I believe there's water enough here for more than just this property. If Mrs. Rosemont finds a sustainable source, wouldn't it be better to work together rather than drive her away? That's not how people are thinking right now, Peterson warned. They see her land as the key to saving the town and her as the obstacle. Then perhaps they need to see things differently, Owen suggested. If we find water, and if Mrs. Rosemont were willing to share access under fair terms, not selling her land, but allowing controlled use of the resource, would that satisfy your community? The men seemed taken aback by the suggestion. Thompson stroked his beard thoughtfully. It might, if there's enough water to make a difference. But you haven't found any yet, have you? We will, Owen stated with such quiet conviction that even Delilah found herself believing it. As the men prepared to leave, Thompson lingered behind. Delilah, he said quietly, James was my friend. He'd want you safe more than anything. Just be careful. Not everyone who came tonight feels as I do. After they'd gone, Delilah and Owen sat in silence as darkness settled over the land. Do you think they're right? She finally asked. That people might resort to violence. Owen's expression was grave. I've seen it happen before. Water brings out the worst in people when it's scarce. He looked at her intently. If you want to reconsider the town's offer, no, Delilah interrupted firmly. This is my home. I won't be driven from it by fear or superstition. A smile touched Owen's lips. I was hoping you'd say that. Something in his gaze made Delilah acutely aware of how close they sat on the narrow porch steps, shoulders nearly touching in the gathering dusk. We should rest, she said, standing abruptly. Tomorrow we dig deeper. Owen nodded, rising as well. Tomorrow, he agreed. But as he walked toward the barn, Delilah couldn't help noticing how his eyes lingered on her, carrying a warmth that had nothing to do with their search for water. The days that followed fell into a grueling rhythm. They would rise before dawn, work until the midday heat became unbearable, rest during the hottest hours, then work again until darkness made continued digging dangerous. The tunnel now extended 30 feet into the hillside, angling downward toward where Owen believed the spring must lie. They spoke little during their work, the physical demands requiring all their concentration, but in the evenings they would sit together, sharing sparse meals and gradually unfolding their lives to each other. Delilah learned that Owen had traveled throughout the West for nearly 15 years, that he had an uncanny gift for languages, which had helped him learn water-finding techniques from Mexican, Chinese, and Native American sources. He told her of the satisfying moments when his divining had saved struggling communities, and the heartbreaking times when he'd arrived too late to help. In turn, she shared stories of her life with James, their courtship in Ohio, their journey west, the dreams they'd had for their California homestead. She found herself able to speak of him without the sharp edge of grief that had accompanied his memory for so long. "You would have liked him," she told Owen one evening as they sat on the porch, watching a rare cloud formation build on the western horizon. "He was curious about everything, always asking questions, drove me to distraction sometimes." "Sounds like we have that in common," Owen acknowledged with a smile. "My mother used to say my questions would wear out the ear of God himself." Delilah laughed. "James said something similar once." Her smile faded as she looked at the cloudless sky above them. "He was so certain this land would provide for us. Even when the first crops failed, he kept experimenting, trying new methods. He never lost faith in this place." "And you? Have you lost faith?" Owen asked gently. Delilah considered the question. "Not faith exactly, but purpose perhaps." "After James died, I kept going because I didn't know what else to do. The land became more of a burden than a dream. And now," she turned to look at him, struck by the genuine interest in his eyes. Most men didn't care to hear a woman's thoughts on such matters. "Now I think I'm finding reasons to fight for it again," she admitted. "Though whether that's wisdom or stubbornness I couldn't say. In my experience, the two often go hand in hand," Owen replied. He hesitated, then added, "especially in women of particular strength." The compliment, delivered with such simple sincerity, caught Delilah off guard. She felt a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the evening temperature. "It's getting late," she said, rising from her seat. "We should—" A distant rumble interrupted her. Both turned to see the cloud formation had grown considerably, dark and heavy on the horizon. "A thunderstorm," Delilah breathed, hardly daring to hope. Owen stood, eyes fixed on the approaching clouds. "Looks that way. First decent chance of rain I've seen since arriving." They watched in silence as the storm built, the air growing heavy with electricity. Lightning flashed within the dark mass, followed seconds later by the rolling growl of thunder. "It might pass us by," Delilah cautioned, not wanting to embrace disappointment yet again. "It might," Owen agreed. "But either way, it's a good sign. Weather patterns are shifting." The wind picked up, carrying the unmistakable scent of rain, a smell so precious that Delilah closed her eyes to savor it. "We should secure anything that might blow away," Owen suggested. "And check that our tunnel entrance is protected. A flash flood could set us back weeks." They worked quickly in the growing wind, securing tools and reinforcing the bracing at the tunnel mouth. By the time they finished, the first heavy drops were beginning to fall, splattering in the dust with audible plops. "Come inside," Delilah called to Owen above the rising wind. "No sense in you getting soaked going to the barn." They barely made it to the porch when the sky opened. Rain came down in sheets, drumming on the roof with a ferocity that made conversation impossible. They stood side by side, watching as the parched earth drank in the sudden bounty, puddles forming in the yard where moments before there had been only dust. Delilah felt a wild joy bubble up within her. She stepped off the porch into the downpour, face turned upward, arms extended as if to embrace the storm. "Delilah," Owen called, but she could barely hear him over the roar of the rain. She laughed, spinning in a circle as water plastered her clothes to her body and streamed down her face. It had been so long, so very long since rain had fallen on her land. Owen joined her in the yard, his own clothes quickly soaked. "You'll catch your death," he shouted, but he was smiling. "Worth it," she called back, grabbing his hands impulsively and pulling him into her impromptu dance. To her surprise, he followed her lead, the two of them whirling in the rain like children. Lightning cracked overhead, illuminating his face, his expression a mix of joy and something else, something that made her pulse quicken even as the cold rain chilled her skin. They were standing very close now, no longer spinning but still holding hands. Rain streamed down Owen's face, catching in his eyelashes and dripping from his jaw. Without thinking, Delilah reached up to brush away a droplet that clung to his cheek. The touch seemed to break something loose between them. Owen's hands moved to her waist, and Delilah found herself stepping closer rather than away, drawn by a force as elemental as the storm around them. His lips met hers with the gentleness of a question. She answered by leaning into him, her arms sliding around his neck as the kiss deepened into certainty. For a moment, there was only the rain, the thunder, and the surprising rightness of being in Owen Xavier's arms. Then reality reasserted itself, and Delilah pulled back, startled by her own boldness. "I'm sorry," she began, but Owen shook his head. "Don't be," he said, his voice carrying even through the storm. "I'm not." Before she could respond, a particularly violent gust of wind tore through the yard, bringing with it the sound of splitting wood. "The tunnel!" Owen exclaimed, breaking away to run toward their excavation. Delilah followed, all thoughts of their kiss pushed aside by immediate concern. They arrived to find the entrance partially collapsed, one of the support beams cracked by a branch torn from a nearby tree. "We need to shore it up before the whole thing comes down," Owen shouted above the storm. They worked frantically in the rain, Owen directing as they added emergency bracing to prevent further collapse. The storm continued to rage around them, but gradually their efforts stabilized the entrance. "That should hold until morning," Owen declared finally, his voice hoarse from shouting over the thunder. They retreated to the house, both soaked to the bone and shivering. Delilah lit the stove and put on water for coffee while Owen stood awkwardly by the door. "You should change into dry clothes," she told him, suddenly shy in the intimate confines of the kitchen. "My spare shirt is in the barn," he replied, equally hesitant. "I should probably—" "Don't be ridiculous. You'll drown between here and there." Delilah rummaged in a trunk and pulled out one of James's old shirts. "This should fit well enough to get you through until the storm passes." Owen accepted the garment with a nod of thanks. An uncomfortable silence settled between them, the easy companionship of the past days momentarily displaced by awareness of what had transpired in the rain. About what happened. They both began simultaneously, then stopped. Owen gestured for her to continue. Delilah took a deep breath. "I don't want you to think I make a habit of. That is, I haven't." She faltered, frustrated by her own inarticulateness. "I would never think that," Owen said quietly, "and I hope you know I didn't come here with any intentions beyond finding water." "I know," she assured him and realized she truly did. Whatever was growing between them had taken them both by surprise. "But now?" he asked, his directness both unsettling and refreshing. Delilah looked at him, this man who had appeared on her doorstep and worked alongside her without complaint, who believed in water beneath her barren land when everyone else saw only failure. She found she couldn't lie to him or to herself. "Now I find myself confused," she admitted. "It's been a long time since I've thought of anything beyond survival." Owen nodded, understanding in his eyes. "We don't need to define this, Delilah, but I won't apologize for it either." He moved closer, stopping just short of touching her. "I admire your strength, your determination. And yes, I'm drawn to you in ways I didn't anticipate." The honesty of his statement disarmed her. "I feel the same," she confessed. But our circumstances, a particularly loud crash of thunder interrupted her, followed by a sound that made them both freeze, the distinct rumble of earth shifting. "The tunnel," Owen said, already moving toward the door. "You can't go out there now," Delilah protested. "It's too dangerous." "If we lose the tunnel, we lose weeks of work," he replied, pulling on his wet coat. "I just need to check that the additional bracing is holding." Before she could argue further, he was out the door and into the storm. Delilah hesitated only briefly before grabbing her own coat and following. The rain had intensified, if such a thing were possible. They fought their way through the downpour to the tunnel entrance, where water now streamed down the hillside in rivulets. "It's worse than I thought," Owen shouted above the storm. "The water's undermining the whole structure." He was right. Despite their earlier efforts, the entrance was sagging dangerously, mud sliding in from the sides. "We need to divert the water," Delilah called, already moving to create a crude channel with her hands. Owen joined her, and together they dug impromptu ditches to redirect the flow away from the tunnel mouth. The work was futile against the relentless rain, but they persisted, desperate to save what they had accomplished. A sudden crack from above made Delilah look up just in time to see a large section of the hillside beginning to slide. "Owen!" she screamed, but her warning came too late. The mudslide hit him squarely, knocking him off his feet and partially burying him in sodden earth. Delilah scrambled to his side, digging frantically at the mud that covered his lower body. "I'm all right," he gasped, though his face was pale with pain. "My leg, I think it's trapped." Delilah redoubled her efforts, her hands clawing at the mud until she could see what held him. A sizable rock had pinned his left leg against one of the fallen support beams. "I need to move this rock," she told him, positioning herself to leverage it away. "Be careful," Owen warned. "The whole hillside could come down." With a grunt of effort, Delilah heaved against the stone. It shifted slightly, enough for Owen to pull his leg free. He winced as he tried to stand, leaning heavily on Delilah. "Can you walk?" she asked, supporting his weight as best she could. "If I must," he replied through gritted teeth. Together they staggered away from the collapsing tunnel, making slow progress through the storm toward the house. By the time they reached the porch, Owen was breathing hard, his face drawn with pain. Inside, Delilah helped him to a chair and knelt to examine his injury. His left leg was swollen at the calf, a deep gash visible through the torn fabric of his pants. "It needs cleaning and bandaging," she said, rising to fetch water and strips of clean cloth. "I don't think it's broken, but you won't be digging any tunnels for a few days." As she tended to his wound, the reality of their situation settled over her. The tunnel was likely destroyed. Owen was injured, and the storm, while bringing much-needed rain, had set back their search for water indefinitely. "I'm sorry," Owen said, watching her work. "All that effort wasted." Delilah looked up at him, struck by the genuine distress in his eyes, not for his own injury, but for her disappointment. "Not wasted," she corrected him. "We learned the approach wasn't stable enough, And we still have the rain." She finished bandaging his leg and sat back on her heels. "It's more than I had before you came." Owen reached out to touch her cheek, his fingers gentle against her skin. "You had courage before I came, Delilah, and determination. I just provided a direction." The tenderness in his voice broke something loose inside her, a knot of tension she'd carried for so long she'd forgotten it wasn't part of her natural state. Tears welled in her eyes, surprising her with their suddenness. "Hey now," Owen said softly, leaning forward to brush them away. "It's just a setback. We'll find another way." "It's not that," Delilah managed, embarrassed by her display. "It's just, I've been alone with this struggle for so long. Having someone else care about it, about what happens to this land, to me." She couldn't finish, but Owen seemed to understand. He pulled her gently up to sit beside him, his arm around her shoulders. "You're not alone anymore," he said simply. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but within the small house, a different kind of storm was calming the years of isolation and fear that had built up within Delilah's heart, giving way to something new, something that felt remarkably like hope. Morning broke clear and brilliant, the storm having passed in the night, leaving behind a transformed landscape. Puddles dotted the yard, and the air held a freshness Delilah had almost forgotten could exist in Skidoo. Owen's injury kept him confined to the house, much to his frustration. His leg, while not broken, was badly bruised and the gash deep enough to warrant concern about infection. Delilah insisted he rest while she ventured out to assess the damage to their work. As she feared, the tunnel had collapsed entirely, the hillside slumped where they had excavated. Weeks of labor erased in a single night. She was returning to the house to break the news when movement on the road caught her eye. A single rider approached, the morning sun glinting off a badge on his chest. Sheriff Walton. Delilah squared her shoulders and waited for him to arrive, determined to face whatever new pressure the town had decided to apply. "Mrs. Rosemont," Walton greeted her as he dismounted, seeming surprised to find her alone. "Where's your water diviner?" "Injured in last night's storm," she replied. "What brings you out here, Sheriff?" Walton surveyed the rain-soaked landscape with undisguised interest. "The storm hit you hard, I see. There was damage in town as well, roof blown off the schoolhouse, flooding in some of the lower streets." He paused. "But the municipal well rose by nearly 2 feet. First good news we've had in months." "I'm glad to hear it," Delilah said cautiously. "The town council sent me to check on you," Walton continued, though Delilah doubted the concern was genuine, "and to inform you that our offer still stands. $500 for the property." "My answer hasn't changed, Sheriff. I'm not selling." Walton's expression hardened. "Mrs. Rosemont, I don't think you understand the situation. The council believes with good reason that there's a significant water source beneath this land. A source that could serve the entire town. Based on a geological survey they kept quiet about while letting me struggle," Delilah pointed out. "Forgive me if I don't trust their sudden concern." "That's water under the bridge," Walton dismissed her accusation with a wave. "The point is, Skidoo needs that water, and one way or another the town will have access to it." The threat was thinly veiled, but Delilah stood her ground. "Are you saying the council plans to take my land by force, Sheriff?" "I'm saying there are legal means to claim land for public necessity," Walton replied. "Eminent domain. The council's been consulting with lawyers in Sacramento." Delilah felt a chill despite the morning warmth. "I don't believe a small town council has that authority. Perhaps not on their own. But with the governor's office involved, which it will be once we present evidence of the town's water crisis, the outcome is inevitable." Walton adjusted his hat, clearly enjoying her discomfort. "Be sensible, Mrs. Rosemont. Take the money while it's offered." $500 can start you a new life somewhere else. And if I refuse, then you'll likely get less when the legal proceedings conclude, and you'll have made enemies of everyone in Skidoo." Walton remounted his horse. "The council meets tonight. I'll tell them to expect your answer by tomorrow noon." As he rode away, Delilah remained standing in her yard, fists clenched at her sides. The brief hope brought by the rain seemed to evaporate in the face of this new threat. Inside the house, she found Owen attempting to stand, his face tight with pain. "I heard voices," he explained. "Is everything all right?" Delilah helped him back to his chair and explained the sheriff's visit. Owen listened intently, his expression growing darker as she recounted Walton's threats. "They're bluffing about eminent domain," he said when she finished. "That process takes months, even years. They want to scare you into selling quickly." "It's working," Delilah admitted. "Owen, what if they're right? What if the town really does need the water more than I do?" "That's not the question," Owen replied firmly. "The question is whether they have the right to drive you from your land through intimidation. They don't." He took her hand in his. "If you want to sell, that's your choice, but it should be made freely, not under duress." Delilah squeezed his hand, drawing strength from his conviction. "I don't want to sell. This is my home, mine and James's, but I don't see how we can fight the entire town." "By finding water first," Owen stated simply. "If we can establish a working well on your property before they force the issue, your position will be much stronger." "The tunnel is gone," Delilah reminded him, "and you're in no condition to dig a new one." A thoughtful expression crossed Owen's face. "The tunnel was only one approach. There's another way, riskier but potentially faster." "What do you mean?" "A vertical well, directly above where I believe the spring to be, near the cottonwoods." Delilah shook her head. "You said yourself that would be too deep for me to manage alone." "Under normal circumstances, yes, but the storm changes things." Owen leaned forward, excitement building in his voice. "The ground is saturated now. If there's an underground spring or aquifer, it will be at its highest point. We might reach it at 40 feet instead of 60. Even 40 feet is beyond what I can dig alone," Delilah pointed out. "Not alone," came a voice from the doorway. They both turned to see Bill Thompson standing there, hat in hand. "I apologize for not knocking," he said. "The door was ajar." Delilah rose, surprised and wary. "Mr. Thompson, what brings you here?" "Walton stopped by my place on his way back to town, told me about the council's plans." Thompson stepped inside, his weathered face troubled. "I didn't sign up for running a widow off her land." Owen watched the newcomer with cautious interest. "You were with the group that came to warn Mrs. Rosemont a few days ago." Thompson nodded. "I was, and I've been thinking about what you said about sharing water rather than taking land." He looked directly at Delilah. "James was my friend. We disagreed about farming methods, but I respected him. When he died, I should have done more to help you." The admission hung in the air between them. Delilah found herself speechless, a mix of emotions, anger at the years of isolation, gratitude for this belated support warring within her. "What exactly are you offering, Mr. Thompson?" Owen asked when Delilah didn't respond. "Help," Thompson said simply. "My 2 sons and I can assist with digging a well. We have equipment you could use, and I'm willing to speak against the council's plan at tonight's meeting." "Why now?" Delilah finally asked. "After all this time," Thompson's shoulders sagged slightly. "Shame is a powerful thing, Mrs. Rosemont. It's easier to believe in curses than to admit you've wronged a neighbor." He straightened. "But there are lines I won't cross, and forcing you from your home is one of them." Delilah studied the man who had once been friendly with her husband, who had gradually withdrawn that friendship after James's death. She saw regret in his eyes and something that looked genuine, a desire to make amends. "If we find water," she said slowly, "I would be willing to discuss a fair arrangement for shared access. But the land remains mine." Thompson nodded. "That's all I'm asking, for a chance to make this right, for everyone." Owen looked to Delilah, clearly indicating the decision was hers. She thought of the collapsed tunnel, of Owen's injury, of the council's deadline. Pride warred with practicality. "We'll need to start immediately," she finally said. "The council expects my answer by noon tomorrow." Thompson's face broke into a relieved smile. "My boys and I will be here within the hour with tools, and I'll spread the word to others who might feel the same way." After he left, Delilah sank onto the chair beside Owen, suddenly exhausted. "Do you think we can trust him?" Owen considered the question. "I think guilt is a powerful motivator, and I think he genuinely regrets how you've been treated." He took her hand. "More importantly, do you trust him?" "I don't know," Delilah admitted, "but I do know we need help, and he's offering it freely." "Then we accept," Owen said simply, "and we stay vigilant." True to his word, Thompson returned with his 2 grown sons and an array of digging equipment. They were followed shortly by Frank Peterson and his foreman, and by midday, 2 more neighboring farmers had arrived. By evening, a crew of 9 men was at work on the well site near the cottonwoods. Delilah found herself in the strange position of hosting men who had avoided her property for years. She prepared food, carried water, and observed the progress with cautious optimism. Owen, despite his injury, insisted on being brought to the site in a chair where he could oversee the digging and offer guidance. The work progressed rapidly with so many hands. By nightfall, they had reached a depth of 15 feet, with sturdy wooden shoring installed every few feet. The mood among the workers was determined, almost festive, a community project taking shape where isolation had reigned for so long. As the men prepared to leave for the night, Thompson approached Delilah where she stood with Owen at the edge of the excavation. "We'll be back at first light," he promised. "Peterson's bringing his block and tackle to help haul up the dirt faster." "Thank you," Delilah said, the words still strange on her tongue after so long without cause to use them. Thompson hesitated, then added, "There's something you should know. Walton came by the farms this afternoon, warning us all to stay away from your property. Said anyone helping you would be considered in opposition to the town's interests." "Yet here you are," Owen observed. "Here we are," Thompson agreed. "Not everyone agrees with the council's methods, Mrs. Rosemont. There are more on your side than you might think." After the workers departed, Delilah helped Owen back to the house. The day's excitement had taken its toll on his injured leg, and he winced with each step despite his attempts to hide his discomfort. "You should rest tomorrow," she told him as she changed his bandage. The wound looked clean, the swelling already subsiding. "I need to supervise the digging," Owen protested. "We're getting close to where I believe the spring lies." "Thompson and his men seem capable enough," Delilah countered. "And you won't be much help if you make your injury worse." Owen caught her hand as she finished securing the fresh bandage. "You're right, as usual. I'll try to be a more cooperative patient." Their eyes met, and Delilah was acutely aware of the contact, his fingers warm around hers, his gaze steady and unguarded. Neither had mentioned the kiss they'd shared in the rain, but it hung between them, an unspoken acknowledgement of changed boundaries. "Delilah," Owen began, his voice low. "When this is over," a sharp knock at the door interrupted him. Delilah pulled her hand away, flustered, and went to answer it. Sheriff Walton stood on her porch, flanked by 2 deputies she didn't recognize. "Mrs. Rosemont," he began without preamble, "I'm here to inform you that the town council has voted unanimously to pursue acquisition of your property through legal channels." As of this moment, you are forbidden from making any alterations to the land pending court proceedings." "What does that mean exactly?" Delilah asked, though she already knew. "It means your well-digging operation stops immediately," Walton replied. "Any further excavation will be considered in violation of the injunction." Owen appeared beside Delilah, leaning heavily on a walking stick. "Where is this injunction, Sheriff? I'd like to see the document." Walton's eyes narrowed at the challenge. "The formal paperwork is being prepared in Sacramento. This is a verbal notification in advance." "Then it has no legal standing," Owen stated flatly. "Without a signed order from a judge, you have no authority to stop work on private property." One of the deputies stepped forward, hand moving toward his gun. "You calling the sheriff a liar?" "I'm stating a legal fact," Owen replied calmly. "If Sheriff Walton has a valid injunction, he's welcome to present it. Otherwise, Mrs. Rosemont is free to continue improvements on her own land." Tension crackled in the air. Walton glared at Owen, clearly unused to having his authority questioned so directly. "The paperwork will arrive tomorrow," he finally said. "Until then, consider this a friendly warning. Continue digging and you'll face consequences." "Is that a threat, Sheriff?" Delilah asked, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "It's a reality," Walton replied. "Skidoo needs water. The council has determined your land is the best source for it. One way or another, we'll have access." He turned to go, then paused. "By the way, the council's offer has been reduced to $300 in light of your uncooperative attitude." After they'd gone, Delilah closed the door and leaned against it, suddenly exhausted. "They're not going to stop, are they?" Owen shook his head. "Not without a fight, but their tactics suggest desperation. They know if we find water before they can get a real injunction, their position weakens considerably." "Then we need to work through the night," Delilah decided. "If they're coming back with paperwork tomorrow, we have until dawn to find water." "The men won't return until morning," Owen reminded her. "Then I'll dig myself." "Delilah, I won't be driven from my home by threats and false legal claims," she stated firmly. "I can manage a few hours of digging alone." Owen studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Not alone. I can sit at the edge and help haul up the earth with the rope system they've set up. Between the two of us, we might make it another few feet by dawn." They worked through the night by lantern light, Delilah digging while Owen operated the pulley from above, raising buckets of soil despite the pain in his leg. The work was exhausting, but determination drove them beyond normal limits of endurance. By the time the eastern sky began to lighten, Delilah had reached a depth of nearly 25 feet. Her muscles screamed with fatigue, her hands raw despite the gloves she wore. She was about to call for a brief rest when her shovel struck something different, not the hard-packed clay they'd been cutting through, but a layer of loose gravel. "Owen," she called up, "I think I've found something." She dug more carefully now, clearing away the clay to reveal a distinct layer of river rock and sand. As she removed more material, water began to seep into the bottom of the well, first just dampening the gravel, then pooling visibly. "It's water," she cried, her voice breaking with emotion. "Owen, there's water." Above, she heard him laugh, a sound of pure joy that matched her own feelings. With renewed energy, she dug deeper into the gravel layer, and the seepage increased, soon covering her boots with an inch of cold, clear water. Dawn was breaking fully when Thompson and his sons arrived, followed quickly by the other neighbors. They found Delilah being helped from the well by Owen, both of them mud-streaked and exhausted, but triumphant. "We found it," Owen announced as the men gathered around. "An underground spring, just as we suspected. Strong flow, The bottom of the well already has several inches of water. The men crowded around to see for themselves, exclamations of approval rising as they confirmed the discovery. Thompson clapped Owen on the shoulder, nearly toppling him with his enthusiasm. "This changes everything," Peterson declared. "The council can't claim the land is worthless now, nor that you're hoarding water that doesn't exist." "They can still try to take it through legal means," Delilah cautioned, unwilling to celebrate prematurely. "Let them try," Thompson replied. "Half the town will stand against them now. Nobody supports stealing a producing well from a rightful owner, especially not a widow who's worked the land for years." As the men discussed next steps, how to properly finish the well, what kind of pumping system would be most efficient, Delilah found herself watching Owen. Despite his exhaustion and injury, he stood tall among the neighboring farmers, explaining the technical aspects of the water source with quiet authority. When he caught her gaze, his smile was intimate, meant for her alone amidst the crowd. In that moment, Delilah realized two discoveries had been made on her land: water beneath the surface. Yes, but also this unexpected connection with a man who had believed in her when no one else would. By mid-morning, the news of the water discovery had spread throughout Skidoo. People began arriving at Delilah's property in small groups, curious to see for themselves if the rumors were true. Among them came members of the town council, their expressions a mix of dismay and calculation as they observed the activity around the new well. Mayor Greenberg approached where Delilah and Owen sat resting on her porch, Thompson standing protectively nearby. "Mrs. Rosemont," Greenberg began, his merchant's smile firmly in place. "Congratulations on your discovery. This is wonderful news for you and potentially for the entire community." "Thank you, Mayor," Delilah replied neutrally. "I understand the town council meets again today to discuss acquiring my land." Greenberg's smile faltered slightly. "Ah, well, in light of these new developments, I believe we'll need to reconsider our approach." "I would hope so," Owen interjected. Attempting to force Mrs. Rosemont from productive land would hardly reflect well on Skidoo's leadership. The mayor's eyes narrowed at Owen, recognizing the implied threat. Of course. No one wants unpleasantness. Perhaps we could discuss a mutually beneficial arrangement." "The town's need for water remains urgent." "I'm open to discussing water rights," Delilah stated clearly, "but I will not sell my land. That's non-negotiable." Greenberg glanced at the crowd of neighbors and townspeople gathered around the well. The public sentiment had shifted palpably, with many now viewing Delilah's successful water search as a reason for celebration rather than suspicion. "I'll bring your position to the council," he said finally. "Perhaps we can draft an agreement that serves everyone's interests." As he walked away, Thompson chuckled. "Never seen Greenberg backpedal so fast. The wind's changing, Mrs. Rosemont. People are remembering you're one of their own, not some outsider to be feared." The observation proved accurate as the day progressed. Women from town arrived with food for the workers. Children played in the yard that just days ago had been avoided like a plague zone. And the talk turned from curses to practical matters of water management. By evening, a crude but functional pump had been installed on the well, bringing clear water to the surface with each stroke of the handle. A small celebration formed around this miracle, with Thompson producing a fiddle and someone else a harmonica. Impromptu dancing broke out in Delilah's yard as the sunset painted the scene in gold and crimson. Delilah found herself drawn into the festivities, accepting congratulations from people who weeks ago had crossed the street to avoid her. The transformation was dizzying, almost unbelievable. "Quite a change," Owen commented, appearing at her side with 2 cups of cider someone had brought. He was still using the walking stick, but moving more easily than the day before. "I keep expecting to wake up and find it's all been a dream," Delilah admitted, accepting the cup. "Yesterday I was the witch who caused the drought. Today I'm the savior with water to share." "People are fickle," Owen agreed. "But not all of them. Some were just afraid and following the crowd." He nodded toward Thompson and Peterson, who were deep in discussion about piping systems. "And some were waiting for a chance to do the right thing." As night fell, the impromptu celebration began to disperse, people returning to town with promises to return the next day and help complete the well's infrastructure. Soon only Owen and Delilah remained, sitting on her porch steps as they had so many evenings before. "The council will meet tomorrow," Delilah mused. "Do you think they'll try again to take the land?" "They'll try to negotiate water rights at a price that favors the town," Owen predicted. "But with public opinion shifting and neighboring farms on your side, outright seizure is unlikely now." Delilah nodded, relief and exhaustion washing over her in equal measure. "I couldn't have done this without you, Owen. You know that, don't you?" He smiled, the lantern light softening the angles of his face. "You would have found a way. You're remarkably stubborn." "Perhaps," she conceded, "but it would have been a much lonelier path." She paused, gathering her courage. "What happens now? With the water found, your work here is done." The question hung between them, laden with unspoken meaning. Owen turned to face her fully, his expression serious. "My work finding water is complete," he agreed, "but if you're asking if I plan to leave." He reached for her hand, entwining his fingers with hers. "Not unless you want me to." Delilah's heart quickened. "And if I want you to stay, then I stay," he said simply, "for as long as you'll have me." The directness of his answer took her breath away. After years of struggle and isolation, the possibility of a shared future seemed almost too much to hope for. "People will talk," she warned, though the words held no real concern. Owen laughed softly. "People always talk. I'm more interested in what you have to say." Delilah looked at their joined hands, then up at his face, now familiar and dear in ways she hadn't anticipated when he'd first ridden onto her land. "I say that finding water was only the beginning of what we might discover together," she answered. Owen's smile deepened, and he leaned forward to brush a kiss against her lips, gentle but full of promise. "I believe you're right, Mrs. Rosemont. Absolutely right." 3 months later, Delilah stood at the edge of her property, marveling at the transformation. The autumn sun cast a golden glow over fields that now showed the first tender shoots of winter wheat. An irrigation system, designed by Owen and built with help from neighboring farms, channeled water from the well to sections of land that had been barren for years. The agreement with the town, negotiated through tense but ultimately productive meetings, allowed Skidoo to pipe water from her spring to supplement their municipal supply. In return, the town council had formally rescinded all claims against her property and provided materials and labor for the irrigation project. Most miraculous of all was the change in how she was regarded. No longer whispered about as a witch or curse bringer, Delilah was now greeted warmly in town, invited to social gatherings, included in community decisions. "Admiring your handiwork," Owen asked, coming to stand beside her. His leg had healed completely, allowing him to take on the physical demands of preparing the fields for planting. "Our handiwork," she corrected, leaning into him as his arm circled her waist. "I still can hardly believe it." "Believe it," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Though I must say, the land isn't the only thing that's flourished these past months." Delilah smiled, knowing he referred to the growing bond between them. What had begun as an employer-employee relationship had deepened into companionship, partnership, And finally, love, a love neither had expected, but both had embraced with increasing certainty. "Have you given any more thought to my suggestion?" Owen asked, a hint of nervousness in his voice that she found endearing. The suggestion in question had been made the previous evening, a proposal of marriage, delivered without fanfare as they sat together reviewing plans for the spring planting. "I have," Delilah replied, turning to face him fully. "And my answer is yes." The joy that transformed Owen's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. He lifted her off her feet in an embrace that made her laugh with delight. "Are you certain?" he asked when he set her down. "I know it hasn't been that long since we met. Time isn't the measure," Delilah interrupted. "What matters is that I know my own mind and heart. I love you, Owen Xavier. I want to build a life with you here on this land that we've brought back to life together." His answer was a kiss that spoke volumes about his own feelings, tender yet passionate, a sealed promise between them. That evening they sat on the porch as they had so often before, planning their future. The wedding would be small but joyful, held in the spring when the land would be in full bloom. They would expand the house, adding rooms for the family they both hoped to create. Owen would continue his water-finding work seasonally, helping other struggling homesteads while maintaining their own growing farm. "I never thought I'd find this again," Delilah confessed as darkness settled around them. "After James died, I believed that part of my life was over." Owen took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "Life has a way of surprising us. When I rode onto your land that day, I was looking for work, not a home, not love. And now I can't imagine being anywhere else," he said simply, "or with anyone else." As stars appeared above their homestead, Delilah Rosemont realized that the true discovery on her land hadn't been water at all, but the far rarer resource of second chances, the opportunity to rebuild not just a farm, but a life filled with purpose and companionship. The following spring, as Delilah had envisioned, the land burst into bloom with colors that seemed almost impossible after years of drought. Wildflowers carpeted sections of the property that had been left natural, while neat rows of vegetables and grain promised a bountiful harvest to come. On a perfect May morning, with cottonwood fluff floating like snow in the gentle breeze, Delilah Rosemont became Delilah Xavier in a ceremony attended by nearly everyone from Skidoo and the surrounding farms. The celebration was held beneath the very cottonwood trees that had first suggested water's presence on her land, trees that now shaded a thriving garden and a newly expanded farmhouse. Reverend Simmons, once among her accusers, performed the ceremony with genuine warmth, his sermon touching on themes of forgiveness and new beginnings. Thompson served as Owen's best man, while the daughter of a neighboring farmer stood beside Delilah as her attendant. Even Sheriff Walton attended, uncomfortable in his Sunday best, but making an effort at reconciliation by presenting the couple with a hand-carved water dipper, a peace offering that acknowledged both the past conflict and the new understanding. "Who would have thought," Thompson remarked during the reception, gesturing around at the gathered community, "that the so-called cursed land would become the heart of Skidoo's revival. Indeed, the success of Delilah's well had inspired renewed hope throughout the region." With Owen's expertise, other farms had discovered water sources they had overlooked. The town's water supply, supplemented by the agreement with the Xaviers, had stabilized, allowing businesses to flourish again. "It wasn't really cursed," Owen replied, his arm secure around his new wife's waist. "Just misunderstood, like its owner." Delilah laughed, the sound free and unrestrained in a way it hadn't been for years. "You're determined to make me sound more mysterious than I am." "Not mysterious," Owen corrected, looking down at her with undisguised affection. Just extraordinary. As the celebration continued into evening, with dancing and feasting under lantern light, Delilah found a moment to slip away to the well that had changed everything. Owen followed, as attuned to her movements as he'd become to the subtle signs of water beneath the earth. Having second thoughts, he asked lightly as he joined her. Delilah shook her head, reaching for his hand. Just taking a moment to appreciate how much has changed. A year ago, I stood here alone, convinced that nothing would ever grow on this land again. Owen drew her into his arms, his body now as familiar to her as her own. In the months since their engagement, they had built not just a functioning farm but a true partnership, each contributing their strengths to create something neither could have managed alone. And now? He asked, echoing a question they had posed to each other many times during their courtship. Now I know that even the most barren ground can yield treasures, given enough faith and perseverance. Delilah's hand came to rest on her abdomen, where the newest miracle was just beginning to make itself known. And some of those treasures are completely unexpected. Owen's eyes widened as he understood her meaning. Truly, he breathed, his hand covering hers. You're certain, Doctor? Winters confirmed it yesterday, she nodded, joy bubbling up within her. We'll have a child by winter. The wonder in Owen's expression was something Delilah knew she would remember for the rest of her life. He gathered her close, his embrace gentle but fierce with emotion. I never thought. He began, his voice thick. After losing my mother so young, I never imagined having a family of my own. Well, Mr. Xavier, Delilah said, smiling through tears of happiness, it seems you've found more than water on this land after all. They returned to their guests hand in hand, their shared secret adding a private dimension of joy to the celebration. As evening deepened into night and the party gradually dispersed, they stood together on the porch of their home, no longer Delilah's house, but truly theirs, and watched the last wagons depart. Happy, Mrs. Xavier? Owen asked, drawing her close against the cooling night air. Completely, Delilah answered without hesitation. And you? More than I knew was possible, he replied. Though I have to admit, I'm looking forward to everyone leaving so I can properly kiss my wife. Delilah laughed and turned in his arms. I believe they're all gone now. Owen's smile was tender as he cupped her face in his hands. So they are. The kiss they shared was both a culmination and a beginning acknowledgement of the journey that had brought them together, an anticipation of the path that stretched before them, as full of promise as their newly green fields. 5 years later, on a warm summer evening, Delilah Xavier sat on the expanded porch of their home, watching her children play in the yard. 4-year-old James, named for the husband she had mourned, chased his 2-year-old sister Emma through carefully tended flower beds that would have been impossible in the drought years. The homestead had flourished beyond anything Delilah could have imagined during those dark days when the town believed her cursed. The original 20 acres had expanded to 60 with the purchase of adjoining land. Orchards now grew where once only dust had blown, and the irrigation system Owen had designed was studied by farmers from as far away as Sacramento. Owen himself had gained a reputation throughout California as a man who could find water where others saw only barren ground. He traveled during the winter months, offering his services to struggling communities, always returning home with new ideas and techniques to apply to their own expanding operations. But it was their family that gave Delilah the most pride. The love she and Owen shared had only deepened with time and challenges, strengthened by common purpose and mutual respect. Their children were healthy and curious, James already showing his namesake's interest in how things worked, while Emma displayed an uncanny ability to make anything grow a green touch that seemed almost magical. The sound of approaching hoofbeats brought Delilah to her feet. Owen was returning from town, where he'd gone to mail letters and pick up supplies. The children abandoned their play to race toward their father as he dismounted. "Papa," James cried, reaching him first, "did you bring the books?" "And my seeds," Emma added, not to be outdone. Owen laughed, lifting both children in a practiced motion that made them squeal with delight. "Yes to both, you little magpies, but first, let me greet your mother properly." He set them down and continued to the porch, his face lighting with the smile he reserved only for Delilah. At 35, Owen Xavier had matured into his strength, the lean young man who had appeared on her doorstep, now a solid presence whose confidence and capability had earned the respect of the entire county. "Welcome home," Delilah said as he climbed the steps to join her. Though his trips to town were brief, she still felt the same flutter of happiness at his return that had marked the early days of their marriage. Owen's kiss was warm and familiar, yet never taken for granted. "Good news from town," he reported as they settled into the porch chairs, the children sorting through the packages he'd brought. "The council approved the school expansion. Construction starts next month." Delilah nodded with satisfaction. The school had been her project for the past year, convincing the town that the growing population of children deserved a proper educational facility, not just the single room that had served for decades. "That's wonderful," she said. "Did Mayor Thompson mention whether they'd approved the library addition as well?" "He did indeed. Said your arguments at the last meeting were impossible to refute." Owen grinned. "I believe our former sheriff is still nursing wounded pride from your dismantling of his budget objections." Delilah laughed. Walton had been voted out of office 3 years earlier, replaced by a younger man more in tune with Skidoo's evolution from frontier settlement to proper town. The former sheriff now ran a modestly successful saloon where he occasionally groused about the way things used to be. "The town's changing," she observed. "Sometimes I barely recognize it from the place that nearly drove me away." Owen nodded thoughtfully. "People change too, given the right circumstances." They both knew he meant more than just the townspeople. Delilah herself had transformed from the isolated widow fighting for survival to a respected community leader, whose opinions carried weight in town meetings. And Owen, the solitary water diviner, had become not just a husband and father but a pillar of the community he had once merely passed through. As twilight deepened around them, James and Emma were persuaded inside for supper and bedtime stories. Later, with the children asleep, Owen and Delilah returned to the porch, a ritual they maintained no matter how busy life became. "I had a letter from Sacramento today," Owen mentioned as they sat together in comfortable silence. "The State Agricultural Board is interested in our irrigation methods. They've invited me to present at their annual meeting." "That's a wonderful opportunity," Delilah said. "Will you go?" "I thought we might both go," he suggested. "Take the children, make a proper trip of it. They're old enough to travel now, and it would do them good to see more of the world than just Skidoo." Delilah considered the proposal. 5 years ago, she would have been reluctant to leave the homestead for even a day, fearful that everything she'd built might somehow vanish in her absence. Now, with trusted hands to manage things and the security that came from established success, the idea held appeal. "I'd like that," she agreed. "Though I suspect Emma will insist on bringing samples from her garden to show these important agricultural men." Owen laughed. "And they'll be better for seeing them. That child has a gift with plants that surpasses even her mother's." "Her mother who was once blamed for causing drought," Delilah mused, the the irony not lost on her, and who now helps design water conservation systems for half the county, Owen added, squeezing her hand. Life takes unexpected turns. They sat in companionable silence as stars appeared above, each lost in private reflection on the journey that had brought them to this moment. "You ever regret it?" Delilah asked suddenly. "Stopping here that day, staying when you could have moved on?" Owen turned to her, surprise evident in his expression. "Never," he said firmly. "Not for a single moment. Why would you ask such a thing?" Delilah shrugged slightly. "Sometimes I wonder what your life might have been if you'd continued wandering, finding water for others but never settling down." "I know exactly what it would have been," Owen replied, drawing her close. "Incomplete. I found more than water here, Delilah. I found home, purpose, family." His voice softened. Love. The simplicity of his answer warmed her more than any elaborate declaration could have. After all they had weathered together, from the hostility of the town to the challenges of building their farm, from the joys of their children's births to the sorrows of losing Delilah's father 2 years prior, their connection remained the bedrock upon which everything else was built. "Besides," Owen added with a hint of mischief, "I was fairly certain you were a witch who controlled the weather. How could I possibly leave without investigating further?" Delilah laughed and playfully swatted his arm. "And your scientific conclusion, Mr. Xavier?" "Still gathering evidence," he murmured, pulling her closer for a kiss that, even after 5 years of marriage, still held the power to make her heart race. "But I'm thoroughly enjoying the research." Later, as they prepared for bed, Delilah paused at the window, looking out over their property. Moonlight silvered the fields and orchards, the well house standing as a silent testament to the day everything had changed, from cursed land to flourishing farm, from feared outsider to respected citizen, from lonely widow to beloved wife and mother. The transformation seemed almost too profound to comprehend. Owen joined her at the window, his arms encircling her waist as they both gazed out at what they had built together. "What are you thinking?" he asked softly. "That water isn't the only thing that can transform a barren landscape," Delilah replied. "Love does that too." Owen's embrace tightened slightly, his chin resting atop her head in the familiar way that always made her feel perfectly at home. "Indeed it does, my love," he agreed. "Indeed it does." And as they turned from the window to the comfort of their shared bed, Delilah Rosemont Xavier knew with absolute certainty that the true miracle hadn't been finding water beneath her land, but finding the courage to believe in second chances, in the possibility that what appears most desolate can, with faith and perseverance, become the source of one's greatest blessings.